Hello, I'm Margaret Ayres from the University of Kent. Vice Chancellors clearly have an important role in terms of this time of change. I wonder if you can say a bit about what you think the capabilities are needed from our Vice Chancellors.
Right. It's very, very interesting. The role of a I think getting the role of a Vice Chancellor clear in the institution's mind is really important. And it depends to a degree on institutional size. But if you take a large institution, the Vice Chancellor in this modern world has, I would say, 3 or 4 key roles. The first is that they are the strategic leader of the organization. It is their job with their organization and with their governing body to determine the strategic future of the university. And a Vice Chancellor worth their salt has to be able to say what they think their university will look like in 5 or 10 years. Secondly, they have to close lead a relatively tight senior team, and that will mean probably a limited number of direct reports. Thirdly, they're crucially important in the culture of the organization. They set the culture of the organization, and if the organization is going through a cultural change, it will depend a lot on the personality of the Vice Chancellor. And finally, crucially, they are the main point of internal and external representation. In other words, it's them that's going out, them doing the lobbying, them as the face of the university, and it's them that are also involved in the internal communications that are so important. What you'll notice I have not said is that they have a profoundly important operational role. Because I don't think that the Vice Chancellor actually should, after they've become bedded in an institution, have a profoundly operational role. And it was John Lowrice, the previous registrar at the University of Southampton, that said, a Vice Chancellor should do what only a Vice Chancellor can do. In other words, if somebody else can do it, your Vice Chancellor shouldn't be doing it, because your Vice Chancellor should be doing those roles that you have employed her or him to do. Now, if you then look at it in that broad strategic thing, I think just at the moment it is about leading your institution through this period of instability. It's about bringing the intelligence back to the institution. It's about knowing your institution. It's about having the best senior team you can. And it's about some very serious scenario planning in an area of instability. And that's all about leadership, leadership, leadership. And it will be different for different sizes of institutions. So that's my view on the role of Vice-Chancellorial leadership just at the moment. Please.
Thank you. Berrien Johnson, Newcastle University. I very much like the idea of evolution with conservation, but some of my colleagues, I think, might interpret that as meaning they don't have to change at all, so the emphasis would be on the conservation. And I just wondered what ways you found are most effective to communicate and lead change.
Yeah. First of all, what an outstanding institution you come from. I just wanted, and where did I graduate again? I just remember. I think, and again, I think this is very institution dependent. And can I be, one of the things that, in a very traditional university like my own university, the idea that you can invoke tectonic change rapidly is an unachievable ambition. And it's about an iterative statement of why we're doing this and what benefits it will bring, and then those benefits finally becoming evident to the organization. I lead because I'm allowed to lead by my organization. My organization doesn't want me to lead it. It'll make that plain very quickly. Therefore, it's incredibly consensual, and you have to build consensus and take people through with that. Now, in different managerial structures, in more dirigist organizations, it may be you're able to do things quicker. But I don't think universities, as they are like some businesses. I mean, I remember a chairman of a trust board that I sat on, a hospital trust board, who had been a major senior player in a very large bank. He said, when we talked about reorganization of the bank. We simply brought out from the board the new structure and told the staff that's what it was. Please don't hesitate to cope. And, you know, there's no way you could do that, as you know, either in a hospital or in... So it is about the continual explanation and the continual bringing of consensus. There's someone there, and then someone there, so...
Black from the University of Glasgow, and I should say we've also got two people from Wales here. So I'm interested in what UUK's perception is of just the implications of some of the divergence, say, in about 5 years' time, and what that also means to how we in Britain present universities to our international students and staff.
Well, I mean, and there are kind of two different problems in Scotland and Wales, as you're probably well aware. I actually, interestingly, have a little more difficulty predicting what the situation will be like in Scotland in 5 or 6 years than I do in England, because there does seem to be a bit of money coming out of the sky philosophy to fund this, and at some stage there's going to be a denouement of this, and how that's going to be handled by any future government, I think, is going to be quite challenging. I do think Scotland has done some very interesting things very early, like combined physics department, combined sciences departments, and there are already very positive outcomes from things like that. But I think that the finances are going to rest in a quite a considerable. I mean, you can tell me I'm wrong. I'm not from that part of the world, as you know, and we do allow University Scotland to manage their own business. But that seems to me the key question going forward. As far as Wales is concerned, there is still a massive restructuring to be brought in to dock. And the outcome of that, I think, will significantly impact on the shape of the universities and the whole functioning of the universities in Wales over a long period of time. And they also face the financial question in the same way as Scotland does. The gentleman over there.
Thanks. Simon Inger, University of Bath. I just wanted to broaden out the leadership theme that you started on, because I'm struck by your image of senior teams around the country closing the curtains and figuring out how they're going to get their university into the brave new world. And there's evidence that organisations that adapt, a feature of that is a sort of refreshment and rotation of some of the most senior leadership positions because you need a different skill set when the world changes in your senior leadership. And I wonder if you think Vice Chancellors and governing bodies are how ready they are to take a real honest and ruthless look at the skill mixes in those most senior leadership teams, and what role do you think HR professionals have in that?
Right, I need to remind everybody I've been in post 11 years, by the way. I mean, there's a very interesting paradox in what you say. The North American experience is the term of presidency of a North American university is decreasing in length annually. So presidencies of North American universities are down now to an average of 4 years. Yet the paradox is some of the most successful universities have been associated with long-term presidencies. So I don't necessarily think that there is an a priori reason why you have to say things have to be of a limited amount of time. What they do in North America, of course, is, which we can't do here, is that they have fixed-term contracts. And so you can see that every 5 years there's a choice made about whether this individual is fit for purpose or not. And if they're not, the contract is not renewed. That, of course, is not doable, as you will know only too well, under European law. So I think that, you know, the fitness and purpose of the senior team, I can tell you, is a constant discussion between myself and the Chair of Council. Constant discussion. The Director of Human Resources will be involved in that. He'll also be part of the discussion. It's a he in our organisation. I'm interested in views. The other thing is that you owe, it's interesting, obviously the leader of an organisation owes a series of duties to the organisation. The organisation also owes some duties to the leader. And to take a 48-year-old and say, by the way, we're going to keep you for 6 years, and even if you do all right, by the way, we need to refresh things, and off you go at the age of 54 and try and find yourself a job in a post-Vice Chancellor's life, it's not going to be easy. It's not an attractive option. So the issue is, you know, do you have to predominantly appoint your Vice-Chancellors so that they're towards the end of their professional career, so that they have a limited lifespan? Or do you take the risk-benefit analysis that if someone stays for a while, actually there is evidence that those people can do the organisation a lot of good? I mean, I've certainly had to make a substantial shift to, from where I was in 2001, a time of suddenly resources coming in, you know, the world looking like expansion, very positive, great plans for investment, to a wholly different world now. I have to say, I'm rather glad I'm as experienced as I am, to be honest with you. But of course, my chairman of council could put his hand on my shoulder tomorrow and say, we think the leadership needs refreshing, Eric. I think that's the term that's used, isn't it? I don't know if that's adequate in terms of an answer.
Yeah, I wasn't aiming particularly at Vice-Chancellors, but, you know, I take your point about being experienced. It's just I've had conversations with institutions that have gone through quite big change, often crisis-driven,
right,
adapting to a new world, and they've said, key to our success was the fact that, you know, those people
right.
weren't up to it in the new world, and they had to be replaced by people who were, and we needed to be very honest about the skills we needed in that position. Absolutely. And it sounds like you're having those conversations, but I'm
well, and everyone does have those conversations. Just a final point. When I talk to incoming Vice-Chancellors, I have to take them out for dinner and talk to them, I say one of the things that I didn't recognise when I started, and one of the major challenges you have, is the constant change to the senior team. I now do not have anybody in my senior team who was there in 2006. And so that, you know, in our situation where Pro-Vice-Chancellors have limited terms of 4 and 5 years, one of the major challenges is there is that constant turnover.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I have a bit of... There's a question here, please.
Mary Luckyram, City University. At a UC event, probably about 18 months ago, Eric, certainly before you became president, you were president-elect and might have therefore had more latitude in terms of what you said. There was a question raised, and in fact a similar question came up this morning with Nikki, the MP, over mergers and acquisitions. And certainly in relation to her response sort of on behalf of the English government, it was that each institution is autonomous and it will govern its own future. May we pose a similar question to you, which is how you see the landscape in 5 years' time in terms of the number of institutions that will still be around, still be sustainable, still be successful, and whether you think there is actually some pressure, whether indirect or direct, from our governments. I exempt Wales from the question clearly because that's very evident what is happening there.
Well, if I can answer the government one, what Nikki said is the government's line, and I'm not just being president of Universities UK here. That if you speak to David Willits about this, he will say that universities are autonomous institutions and they must decide their own future. It's not we think mergers and acquisitions are a good idea or a bad idea. You know, we expect the universities to react to whatever challenges they have in front of them at the time. I have a feeling there will be mergers. I don't think... What you've got to look is the trajectory of change. In fact, for the first year, the change is quite heavily buffered because we have years 2, year 3, year 4, and year 5 in there on the previous regime. But then when you move to the second year, that buffer starts to disappear. And by the third year, it's almost completely disappeared. So this tightening of change is really going to make a difference in years 2 and 3 in this. That's when the roosters are going to come home to roost. I think, and I've said this on numerous occasions, there are something like 42 separately governed higher education institutions within the M25. And my view is, if you want me to lay a bet, in 10 years' time there will be substantially less than 42 separately governed higher education institutions in that particular geography. There may well still be the buildings, there may well still be delivering higher education, but they will be delivering them, I'm sure, under the umbrella of a substantially smaller number of organizations. Now, is that transferable to other big cities? It's difficult. I mean, you know, possibly Manchester has that degree of size associated with it. But certainly I see inside London, we are already doing all sorts of things. So if you take Bristol, for example, we would not consider now putting in a major grant to any of the research councils, particularly for things like doctoral training, without doing it with Bath and Exeter and Cardiff. And our one into the Arts and Humanities Research Council is going to go in with Reading as well. There is going to be a huge more of that kind of collaboration. And whether that leads to something more profound in the future, I honestly don't know. I mean, I've always said that in Bristol, there's a clear, obvious business argument that as the University of Bristol and the University of West of England are in the same game, but as both Vice-Chancellors would say, predominantly in different parts of the game, why don't you just merge and create a single institution? To which the answer is to do with brands. And Steve West would argue he's got a brand and I would, and we wouldn't do that. But, you know, we will already talk about much more backroom working together, looking at that, you know, and will we have single payrolls? So I have a feeling that pressure to economize, in the way I described in my speech, will be the first thing that you see, and then you may see mergers and acquisitions at a later date. There's another question which your question begs, and I may as well answer it, was do I expect institutional failure to occur at some stage? And you can see a situation where it's possible for you, I mean, for a start, that universities have got themselves into trouble already in the past, we know that, so it's not as if the new changes necessarily precipitate. But we will then come up against the questions of, you know, okay, if you decide to close an institution in a 12 million person city, there's plenty of capacity to take that up. What if that's a single institution in a single city? If it starts to get itself into financial problems, it's so economically important to the city that it's in that actually, in inverted commas, allowing that institution to fail is not an option. It's not a social or political or economic option. Now, whether it would then merge with a university in a nearby city or whatever and become a branch campus of that university, I just genuinely don't know. But I think all of this will play out, and those are the dynamics I see happening. I think they might be wanting to take an early lunch. Are there any more questions? Yes, there's one down the front here. I'm quite happy for an early lunch, by the way.
You were talking about the cultural importance of preserving the sector in terms of its long history of the way it works, but at the same time you were talking about the new and growing threats, if you like, in terms of the private sector getting involved in delivering higher education. What would you be looking for from the HR function to address both the threat of the private sector but also the opportunity that it presents in the next few years?
Right. I mean, in the final analysis, what is going to make a university successful is that it gets the highest quality staff inside it possibly can. I don't think anything trumps that. So I want HR to work inside with the senior team to create the very best environment that's going to attract the highest quality staff. And that, of course, is about all sorts of things like working conditions, positive working environment, how the place functions, what's the culture inside the place. I've always said that, you know, particularly if we look at our academics, which are in inverted commas in the academic world, the productive end of the spectrum, Why would an academic come to a particular university? Well, first of all, they want the intellectual environment in which they can best flourish. They want the best colleagues. They want that to be a place where they can function best intellectually. They then want the resources to go with that, if you don't mind. Can I have the labs, please? I need a couple of postdocs or whatever, or I need access to a decent library. Then they want to know where the place is. So is the city a place that they'd like to go to? Is it somewhere that's going to deliver a quality of life to them? Is it going to be good for their spouses and their children? And then finally, I would argue, they'd want to know what they're getting paid for that. But that's the priority list. And so the purpose, what I want HR is to help sustain that priority list. And I'm absolutely clear in my own mind that the working environment, how they find working in the environment, is crucially important. I mean, some of you will know that I've got history about this with Bristol's initiative in a positive working environment. I've often said that when I arrived at the university, it was quite hierarchical in the way that it functioned, and it was quite clear, and I wasn't, and people weren't empowered in the way that I wanted them to be, and I'd been used to in my previous university. And you know, what we wanted to do was to move to a situation where the whole environment felt much freer and more relaxed and more creative, and where people, when I use the rugby analogy, you know, if they find the rugby ball in the middle of the pitch, they'll actually pick it up and run with it. Whereas we were having difficulty getting them even to pass it along the three-quarter line. Now, I think if that change can come about, if we can successfully bring that change about inside my own organisation, that will probably be the biggest and most important legacy that's been left behind. A group of empowered, creative people who feel they can get on and do their work in a supportive environment. And that, I mean, you're right at the centre of doing that, absolutely right at the centre of it in HR. Two now. There's a gentleman here and then a lady there.
Hi, you can probably tell I'm from a remote colonial outpost.
Oh, yes, right.
Yes, we don't play very good rugby. John Steele from the University of Wollongong. We've talked a lot this morning about public policy positioning of government and funding and those sorts of pressures. There's another set of pressures, technology, and particularly the Americans, MIT, open curriculum and those sorts of things. And sometimes when you're obsessed with funding and a bit of a siege mentality, do you think UK universities generally are well placed in terms of innovation and technology to maybe deflect some of those or remain competitive with those sorts of challenges that will come, I think, from increasingly prestigious US universities?
Yes, I mean, there are two kind of implications in your question, if I get it. One is about new technology, distance learning, what you can do with that. And secondly, there's a kind of internationalization thing hanging over what, you know. And we're, at the moment, we're in a profound period where UK universities are heavily involved in internationalization in one sort or another. I do think that they tend to look at it in what I would slightly call a kind of neo-colonialist way. In other words, just going out and sort of our new product is higher education. I think there's another dimension to it about working with partners in really rather different ways. On the internationalization agenda, I think in 20 years' time, try and think in 20 years' time, are we going to see an array of a relatively small number of very big universities that are global corp, that have campuses in Dubai and campuses in Beijing and campuses here, there, and they are literally, you know, a mini Toshiba? Or are we going to have lots of PhD theses on the internationalization bubble in the first part of the 21st century? And actually what will have happened is that those universities will indulge in that internationalization. They won't have been able to sustain it because the quality will be improving in the countries in which they're going to, and the model they're using isn't a particularly sustainable one, and they'll have retreated back to being what they have traditionally been. And I'm not sure which of the two those are going to be. In terms of distance provision, we do, of course, have the world's very best university for distance provision in the Open University. And if you go there and see the kind of innovation they're using, it's just astonishing, absolutely astonishing. And, I don't know whether it's a question of open source, open curricula or what, or it's something even more tectonic. I mean, we have a father who happens to be on our finance committee his son is at the university, and his son doesn't go to the lectures, he just gets the podcast of the lecture and sits in his room and goes through the podcast of the lecture, and it's great because he can repeat it and go back and repeat it and repeat it. Now that's a complete paradigm shift for me. What? It's an astonishing change. Now, how is that technology going to change things? How's the attitudes of the people using the technology? I think we will all be very, very surprised by what's happening, but we can't predict it. How's your new Vice Chancellor, by the way? Is he settling in all right?
He's going very well.
Right, good.
Hello, I'm Louise Lindsay from Imperial College. I was interested, going back to your point about the environment that you create for staff, and just wondering whether you're getting involved in any debate about whether that environment and the pay and conditions extends to contracted out workers as well, because obviously there's some pressure at the moment from government ministers and the Labour Party to lobbying heads and vice-chancellors on living wage for institutions. And I think there are two schools of thought. One is that pay policy and minimum pay rates are set by government and are not a matter for universities, and another would say that there was a corporate social responsibility outside of widening participation. And I'd just be interested in your views on that.
Well, first of all, I think I have to speak as Eric Thomas rather than President of Universities UK, if you don't mind. When I arrived at Bristol, I said that nobody should be paid under £10,000 a year. I didn't think that in a city in the southwest of England, £10,000 a year was anything less than that was a difficult wage for people to live on. I believe if there is a set national minimum wage, then my personal belief is that we should follow that. I just believe that. These are tough times, and it's not easy to live on the national minimum wage as it is. Contracting out provides a series of other problems which actually we haven't had to address in our own institution, but I do understand that certainly in London institutions are a significant issue. I mean, I suppose the debate over port after dinner would be, I always like to think of, I prefer not to think of rights, and I like to think of duties, because I think that makes a much better discussion. Does a university have a duty to ensure that all of the individuals that work inside it under any construct actually are paid a wage which enables them to live? And my view is that as value-driven organizations, that we probably do have that duty. That's my personal view. But, I'm not running all of the institutions where these are critical issues. But you do owe everybody who works in your institution a duty. I don't want the chap from the THE saying, Jack, that is not President of Universities UK.